Albie, what an honor to be here in your home. Thank you for having us with no shoes in our socks. I'm very grateful that I'm actually wearing a decent pair of socks today. But Albie, thanks for entertaining us in your home, and I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions just about you and your experience, and just get a little bit of insight in terms of your perspective as a leader, and having, worked with and been with so many famous leaders in our past. But before we get to that question, Albie, can we just touch upon, just get a sense of your origin story leading up to becoming an activist and being such a pivotal figure in South Africa's history? What were the sort of building blocks of that journey? What led you to becoming so involved in the struggle? I'm leading with a hot question.
No, that's not a hot one. I'm smiling because I was born into it. Even my name, Albie, Albert, I was named after Albert Nzula. He was an African trade union leader, a communist in the 1920s and 30s. He died before I was born. And my dad, Albie Sachs, was the General Secretary of the Garment Workers Union in Johannesburg. My mom, Ray, had split from him. And we were living here in Clifton then. My first memories living in Clifton.
Yes.
And she'd say, tidy up, Uncle Moses is coming. Now, Uncle Moses wasn't Moses Cohen or Moses Levine. It was Moses Kotani. And she was the typist for Moses Kotani, who was the General Secretary of the Communist Party.
Oh, okay.
So I grew up in a world where my mother, a white woman, was working for a black man. And not only that, but with enormous affection, and she honored him and was proud to be working with somebody whom she admired so much. That was my natural world.
And that was in the 40s, right?
It was the late 30s.
Late 30s. Okay.
And in that sense, the racism of South African society just seemed absurd, mad.
Sure.
The real world was the world that I grew up in, and the emotions and the relationships, and there was a warmth and a companionship and a sense of connection that was very strong. He used to sometimes, my mom would say that Comrade Moses would say that Ray taught me to read and write, now I'm her boss. And that sense of humor was also part and parcel.
Yeah.
But I hated my parents assuming I would automatically follow in their footsteps.
Sure.
It was only in my second year at University of Cape Town where I met a young crowd who had these same very, very strong ideas about change and transformation, and we even spoke about revolution. South Africa is such an unjust society, and I was ready for them.
I'm sure.
I didn't want it to come from the top, to be like an obedient son automatically. I wanted to find my own way. And then when I met, and it wasn't only the politics, there was a vivacity and intensity, enthusiasm about life. We climbed Table Mountain, we had all-night parties, we would argue questions of philosophy. We would say, should there be one language, if we had Esperanto, one language for the whole world, would that solve the problems of the world?
Sure.
And it was so much more vivacious and interesting than the conversations I'd have with the other boys and some girls, of my generation.
Sure. Okay, so that was your formative years, and it sounded really challenging and exciting and important, right? What led you to actively getting involved and becoming more vocal and outspoken?
There's so many things, looking back, but the one trigger was poetry. My mom told me that there was a poet called Ace Krieger, South African poet, who was going to give some lectures. She knew I loved poetry. I'm now already completed my first year of a law degree at the University of Cape Town. Sure. Mountain climbing, I didn't even know who to vote for in the student elections. That wasn't my concern. So I go to listen to Ace Krieger, and he's speaking about a Spanish poet called Lorca. I didn't even know they had poets in Spain, bullfights. Yeah. And he describes Ace Krieger was in Spain in the late 30s, the time when the fascists destroyed the Republican state and took over. And he explains to us about Federico Lorca, this great playwright and poet who was put up before a firing squad and killed,
Sure.
executed, because he was opposed to fascism. And he quoted a poem by, now again, I didn't know Pablo Neruda, Chilean, I didn't know they had poets there as well, at 5 in the afternoon. A las 5 de la tarde, at 5 in the afternoon, at 5 in the afternoon. Wow. You know, and Ace walking up and down, speaking English, a bit of Spanish, a bit of Afrikaans, a bit of French, and English, non-stop, up and down. And it did something to me. It connected up the inwardness, the soulfulness of poetry with the public events of the world.
Sure.
And a few months later, I'm joining the Defiance of Unjust Laws campaign. I'd met up with this young crowd, Modern Youth Society, we were called in Cape Town. And it's the 6th of April, 1952, 300 years since Jan van Riebeeck arrived, and the Afrikaner nationalist government's been in power since 48,
Yes.
with this new term called apartheid,
Sure.
and the planes are flying overhead and the armored cars through the streets, celebrating 300 years, as they called it, of civilization. And there are about 200 of us in the Salt River Town Hall, a very crummy little place, and we singing. Maybe 200, would be 200, 190 black and maybe 10 white people. And the songs then would be very sad. My boye, my boye, Africa, come back Africa. A song that's still sung today. Senzenina, Senzenina,
Wow.
what have we done, what have we done? And suddenly it's Dr. Morocco, Dr. Dadu, JB Marks, Katani Labour Puppy, volunteers obey the orders, be ready for the action now, volunteers, and they're calling for volunteers
Yeah.
to defy unjust laws. And I say to my friend, Wolfie Kodish, I want to join. You can't. Why? Because you're white.
Yeah.
But we're fighting racism. It's a black struggle led by black people. But the fact was, 7 months later, I'm leading a group of 4 of us, young white people, to sit on seats in the General Post Office marked non-whites only.
Wow.
So people asked me afterwards, Albie, how come you brought culture into the ANC and into the struggle? And I said, it's actually the other way around. It was culture, those lectures on Lorca and afterwards Pablo Neruda, that did something to my imagination, my mind, my creativity, linking your inner soul with the public events of the world.
Sure.
I remember in our organization, we painted a big mural. We had a sort of warehouse where we would have our activities, and somebody had a painter, an artist. She'd read about the Mexican muralists, Diego Rivera and Orozco, and they painted not paintings for people to put in their private homes, not for a church, but public events,
Sure.
public big murals. And we painted a mural of Cape Town, the other Cape Town, people's Cape Town, of the dock workers, of the railway workers, of the street sellers, the flower sellers. And we were all given a block to fill in. And it was like exciting.
Wow.
And we were kicked out of that place, and the police came in, they painted over. We don't even have a photograph of it, but that lodged in my mind.
Sure.
And years later, I go to Mozambique after independence there. Everybody's painting on the walls, and I actually painted myself something and did a book on the murals of Maputo. And years after that, we're building the Constitutional Court. And I and Yvonne Bechoro are put in charge of decor. And, you'll see the court if you haven't seen it already.
Yes, yeah.
It's the most fabulous place.
Next week, yeah.
And so that idea of creativity in buildings, in space, in environment, in your imaginations, in styles of work, all of these themes played themselves out at different stages in my life.
Sure, and it just feels like that seems to be a common thread in history, that conflation of almost, you know, the violence and the fire with the poetry and the art and the creativity, and where there's that tension, there's as you say, the excitement, and there's change, and there's this meaning and purpose that I think people rally behind. And in terms of, I mean, obviously that led you to some very dangerous situations, and at points it must have not been as exciting and more fearful. You know, it must have been quite scary. Would you mind telling us about, obviously, the story you've probably told a million times, but what led to the big pivotal moment where you were exposed to a bomb, and how that changed your life?
You know, I think back, the hardest times of solitary confinement in Cape Town, this beautiful Cape Town, and you're locked up in a cell and you can't see out, and you're just alone. Nothing. Your toes, the wall, the toes. You don't know how long you'll be there. And I had 90 days of that. On a good day, I would just be depressed. On a good day. Total despair. And you forget the world outside, and words like freedom just kind of mean nothing. It's as though you were born in that little space and you're doomed to exist and maybe die in that little space. And I'm released for 3 minutes and arrested again. And they take away your watch, your shoelaces, your tie, and you don't know how long it's going to go on. And eventually, after 168 days, I'm released, and I ran from Caledon Square, the centre of Cape Town, to Clifton. This Clifton that I love so much. I'd never run that distance in my life. I flung myself into the water. My colleagues coming in their suits from the bar in Cape Town, remember their shiny shoes, some brown, some black, and on the beach, and they're all very amused, and they think I'm a little bit mad. I was a little bit mad, but I was joyous. I'd survived, but something inside me was broken. And 2 years later, I had another spell, and this time Roed, the notorious interrogator from Pretoria, came down with a team. They didn't beat me up, but they shouted, banged the table, noise for 10 minutes and 20 minutes silence. And then blah, 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 blah. He used to brag that he was trained by the French in Algeria, a terrible internationalism between the security forces of the world, how to break down people, destroy their world. And I collapsed, I fell on the floor. They picked me up, prized my eyes open, poured water on me. I collapsed again several times, and something more was crushed. So when I eventually went into exile in England, I was very down. I did anti-apartheid work. I got a PhD at Sussex University. I published books, became a father with 2 wonderful children. But something, even when I was happy in England, and I had great friends there doing wonderful work, I was unhappy. I go to Mozambique, newly independent. That energy was terrific. My courage comes back, and I'm there for 11 years, and one day I'm going to the beach, and boom, total darkness. And
did you have an inkling that you were under threat? Did you realize that you were a target?
We lived with dread all the time.
Okay.
Ruth Westwood had been blown up by a letter bomb.
Yes.
She was a wonderful intellectual writer, doing work for the UN, Centre for African Studies in Maputo, and turned out Craig Williamson sent this parcel to her, and it blew away her face. It was awful. So we were waiting for it. In that sense, would it happen? Would they come for me? And there's total darkness. I know something terrible's happened. And I hear a voice saying into the darkness, Albie, this is Eva Garrido speaking to you. You're in the Maputo Central Hospital. Your arm is in lamentable condition. You must face the future with courage. And into the darkness, I can't see anything. I say, what happened? And a woman's voice said it was a car bomb. I faint back into delirium, but with joy. They'd come for me. That moment, every freedom fighters waiting for? Will they come for me? If they come for me, will I be brave? And I'd survived. And I had a total conviction as I got better, my country would get better. That was April 1988.
Wow, what a crazy story. My world. So you saw darkness, and then the next thing was
hearing
waking
the voice.
up in hospital. And how? What is the?
I'm not waking up. I'm inert. I can't. I'm in total darkness, and the voice is speaking to me.
And the gap of time between, I mean, how long were you in hospital? How long were you out for?
Okay, then, I mean, the story continues. I find myself lying on my back, feeling very light, joyous. And I tell myself a joke. It's about Jaime Cohen, like me, he's a Jew. He falls off a bus, he gets up and he does this. And someone says, Jaime, I didn't know you were Catholic. He says, what do you mean Catholic? It's an old joke. Spectacles, testicles, wallet and watch.
Yeah.
So for some reason I started with testicles. And
still there.
I've spent my whole life trying to be macho without success. But the word went round the ANC circles. The first thing Comrade Albie did was reach for his balls. And seemed to be in order. Wallet, my heart, seems to be in place. Spectacles, my head, there's a crater, and I know if there's brain damage it can be serious.
Sure.
And then my hand slides down, I've lost an arm.
Okay.
I've only lost an arm.
Wow.
And I felt joyous. And to carry the story forward a bit, a few weeks later, in the London hospital, I'm recovering. It's fantastic recovering. Look, Mommy, I can write. Learning to do afterwards, look, Mommy, I can stand. It was like literally being reborn. And the fight to get my body back and my dignity back was also in a way a fight against apartheid, the people who tried to kill me. And one day I get a letter. And I love telling people today, letters, these things, we used to lick the stamps.
Yeah.
And I open it with my one hand and it says, don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. And I think, avenge me? We're going to cut off the arms. We're going to blind in one eye. Is that the country we're fighting for? But if we get freedom, if we get democracy, that will be my soft vengeance. Roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. And that theme, soft vengeance, then became the theme of my life. Soft vengeance. You don't do to them what they did to you. Then you're the same, only a bit stronger.
Sure.
You transcend what they're doing. You get the triumph of your ideas, the things you're fighting for, the things you believe in. That is much more powerful, much more meaningful. It makes sense of everything than simply trying to beat them down and get revenge. And then I can see it's going back, helping to write the Constitution,
Sure.
Voting as an equal for the first time, sitting on the court, being appointed by Mandela to the Constitutional Court, defending the thing, soft vengeance.
That's soft
and
vengeance,
finally putting up this fantastic building. Soft vengeance is very powerful. That's as I mentioned, turning the sword into a plowshare is more powerful than using the sword to smite your enemies.
Albie, that's such a beautiful concept, soft vengeance. It's almost a literal manifestation of Gandhi's words, you know, an eye for an eye, the whole world will be blind, right? So you turned that on its head, and now you're one of the architects of this amazing document, the Constitution, which I think many of us don't really understand. Many of the youth we don't get why it's so important. And I mean, in a few words, can you explain and elaborate what is this thing called the Constitution, and why should the youth care?
You know, in a way, it's good that they're kicking against it, because they're saying there's so much injustice in the society, there's so much unfairness, there's so many things going wrong. And you tell us this beautiful constitution, and there's a big gap between reality and the constitution. I think what they don't realize, and it's partly our fault, the change from what it was like before is enormous. I sometimes say when the shackles fall, the pinpricks hurt like hell. It's not to say the slights and the covert racism and the unemployment and the violence and the corruption are pinpricks, but compared to what it was, it's huge. We got a country. We didn't have a country before.
Sure.
We had people living in this territory at each other's throats. It's amazing. We've had 6 general elections. People used to say, one man, one vote once. Democracy is not for Africa. Our elections are free and fair. They work. We have an independent electoral commission. We have a judiciary that watches over the independent electoral commission. We can speak our minds. I can say what I like on film now.
Yes.
This is taken for granted. For me, it's huge. And in a way, it's positive it's taken for granted. The point of departure now is not to be satisfied with what we have. But I think there are extra elements in our constitution. There's a richness and a texture. It gives people space to fight for change, to fight for making things better. It's based on human dignity. The theme of Ubuntu, profound African concept, underlies everything in our constitution. The way we got it, the way we apply it, the way it's interpreted by the Constitutional Court. So my challenge, if you like, to young people is to say, don't denounce the Constitution, use it to denounce the injustices of our society.
Okay, brilliant. And I think just to also revisit it and learn what it means and to lean into it and embrace it, I think is quite an important rite of passage for us, because otherwise we forget the past, right?
And give it meaning. The Constitution is sufficiently flexible and open to take on a configuration with the inputs of the idealism, the hopes, the demands of people. It's not a rigid technical document, so it's not only voting, which is extremely important. It's not only challenges you can bring in court. It's not only freedom of speech. It's the space that's given for entrepreneurs, which is your special interest.
Sure.
It's the hopefulness, the idealism that's there. It's the emphasis that everybody counts. Everybody's important. You know, you're concerned with leadership, and there's grand leadership at the high levels. But there's leadership in your community.
Yes.
There's leadership in your family. There's leadership in your school. There's leadership in your faith community. And all of these spaces, areas, can be areas of contestation. Contestation can be ugly. Contestation can be a source of vitality. And what the Constitution does is guarantee the profound values that we need for building a better society.
It forms this platform, and the work that you and your colleagues have done has created something that we as the young entrepreneurs can stand upon, like a springboard, really, that allows us that freedom to be able to speak openly, to challenge power with truth, and to, I suppose, to disrupt the status quo in a positive manner and affect change. I mean, I think the thing that we're so passionate about at Heavy Chef, and despite our quirky approach and so on, is that entrepreneurs affect change faster than any other sector, right? The young disruptors really can make change fast. And I think, I mentioned to you off camera that we focus on technology, leadership, and creativity. And with leadership in mind, we have these young leaders coming through with their technical ideas and disruptive business products and so on. What advice do you have for these young leaders who are sitting within now in a position of power and influence?
Well, I'm very fascinated by this concept of disruption.
Yes.
Because my whole life I've been called a klipgooier, a disruptor. And suddenly now we're hearing it from the capitalists, the entrepreneurs.
Yeah. It's a refreshing change, really.
It is a refreshing change, and I think it's good for society. And it makes me a little uneasy because it also means disrupting people like me.
Yeah.
You know, we're the so-called icons of the struggle.
Yes.
And now people are shaking, and an icon is very wobbly.
Sure.
An icon by nature is not supple,
Yeah.
and doesn't have a spring. The icon is cast.
Yeah.
And the iconoclasts
Yeah.
now are the ones who are trying to push us down.
We've got the old ideas. Now
But-
it's all these new,
Yes,
fresh ideas.
even the old ideas about new ideas,
Yeah.
the old ideas
Yeah.
about struggle,
Yeah.
the old ideas about heroes.
Yeah,
Poor old Madiba. I mean, Madiba's strong enough to defend his own reputation.
for sure.
But there's been very astonishing, almost an erasure of one of our great black heroes by young black people who feel impatient at what's been achieved in the country, and with a lot of justification.
Sure.
In any event, I think we're robust enough, we've seen enough change in our lives to not only handle the disruption, but to welcome it, because we've been disruptors ourselves. And in a sense, the advice I give to young people is don't listen to the advice of old people like me. And you know, we often hear the phrase, follow your dreams.
Yeah.
And I say, no, follow your life and your dreams will follow you. If you follow your dreams, your dreams to be someone else, to be like someone else, to have role models. You've got to be your role model. You've got to have a confidence and guts and spirit and energy inside yourself, which you express and you're allowed to express, and your dreams will come trailing behind you. You don't even quite know what your dreams will be. It's an inversion of the usual kind of a statement. And I sense that's helped me a lot in life.
Sure.
I've had the dream of freedom, of liberation, and that's a very broad thing. It's been shaken up in many ways. Societies that we admired a lot turned out to have lots of ugly features to them. My own organization, the ANC, for which I was willing to give my life, almost gave my life, we had bad people. It's not something that just happened in the last 10 years.
Sure.
We had bad people. There was always the struggle between the honest, the non-corrupt, and sometimes those who were the most honest fighting the corrupt then afterwards went on to be corrupt themselves later. So that caution, that capacity to willingness to look at evidence, to accept change, to acknowledge weakness in yourself, people very close to you. I think that's very, very important. But we shouldn't allow the negative to triumph over the positive. There's a certain self-fulfilling capacity that positivity has. If you start off negative, you go down and you prove the negative.
Sure.
If you start off positive, the positive doesn't wipe out the negative, but it gives you an energy, a forcefulness, a conviction that enables you to withstand it, and it's often self-fulfilling.
Sure. That's amazing. I mean, it's quite a surprising bit of advice. My advice is not to listen to my advice, which is great. And I think it really resonates with me what you're saying, you know, as opposed to chasing a far distant dream, to check in and look at your own life and what you're good at and what you can do and how you can affect change. I think that's so relevant to today's generation as well as your generation. So Albie, thank you so much for your time and for your input and for your contribution to our society. And it's such a poetic justice that we're sitting here in your childhood neighborhood and seeing you looking so fulfilled and happy and still working so hard on restoring and retaining our constitution. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.